And I heard some really interesting phrases that I heard at meetings. One person said, "We fail to see how others suffer from us." Again, we fail to see how others suffer from us. And I thought that was a revolutionary thing, like almost like a spiritual awakening. When I first thought about that in my mind, did other people suffer from me? I thought they were the problem. How could they suffer from me? And then the other phrase I heard in the meeting was really interesting. I was never the SOB in my story. I was never the SOB in my story. When I tell my story everywhere, it was everybody else. So in our program, it talks about the resentment is the number one offender. So we have a way on page 67, I said in the middle of the page in the big book, it says, referring to our list. This is talking about the step 4. When we make a list of people, institution, places, whatever it is, that offend us. Putting out of our minds the wrongs others had done. Again, on page 67 in the Alcoholics Anonymous big book. Putting out of the minds the wrongs others had done. We resolutely look for our own mistake. So I never did that. And as a result, I was miserable, upset when I came into these meetings. I was addicted to drugs and food, whatever it is. And we're here for all those different addictions. Where had we been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened? Again, it's telling me, you can't fix something until you know where the problem was. In this big book, it's telling us where the problem is. And though a situation had not been entirely our fault, we tried to disregard the other person involved entirely. Where were we to blame? The inventory was ours, not the other man. So people will say, well, suppose somebody's acting, they're pushing my buttons and they're acting really obnoxious, or they're doing this to me or doing that to me. So how could the fault be mine? Well, the whole thing is it takes two to argue, right? So we have what's called, right before this on page 66, the bottom into the top of this page, it has a sick man prayer. And it tells us a solution. It's amazing. Right here, it tells a solution. We look at the other person as though they've been perhaps spiritually sick. It says on the bottom page 66 into 67, it tells us a solution. We look with them with patience, pity, and patience and tolerance on the near the top of 67. When a person offended, we said to ourselves, this is a sick man. And it also refers to when we visit somebody in the hospital, they have, say, a broken leg, we have compassion and love for them. We don't get angry, resentful at them. So the same with this. When somebody acts a certain way, we can have patience, tolerance, and love towards them. And it gives us the answer. The big book's amazing. It tells the problem and it gives us the solution, almost on every page, especially the first 164 pages. So it goes on to say, if you go to page 69, on page 69, on the second paragraph it says, we reviewed our own conduct over the years past. Where had we been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and afraid? Whom had we hurt? Did we unjustly arouse jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness? Where were we at fault? What would have been done instead? We got this down on paper and we looked at it again. The whole thing with all this resentment, which is the number one problem, think about it. Most of the times during the day, it's related to people and having resentment and anger, jealousy, envy towards them, all of these things. And again, we have a solution where we have to look at our own selves, and it's all in our perception. And I heard in the beginning of the meeting, somebody says, make it all about what this whole program is a spiritual program about a higher consciousness to become spiritual, get out of the human experience. So when I'm in the human experience, all these things happen. I worry about people, situations, and all of these petty everyday things. And I forget about the vastness of the universe and the vibrations and everything around us, nature, and I become into very finite. And I'm not into the spirituality. And then we'll also get back into our addiction, because our addiction is related to the same thing. Before we're making people our higher power, being into the resentment or anger or fear. And when we get the God consciousness we can have it towards our addictions too, where we get our spiritual and we get full with spiritual things. We won't need material things such as, again.
If you like the video and want to spread the message, press the like and subscribe button. Thank you.
We look for the food. And in this case, when we're talking about resentments, anger, and fear, and jealousy, and all of those, what they call the 7 deadly sins, right? And we're always looking for fill ourselves up with pride being number one. So we have an answer to all of these things, whether it could be, step 1 says we're powerless over people, food, it could be anything, alcohol, drugs. So the whole answer is called a spiritual solution, And in here it talks about that the inventory being ours means that we have to look at where we had gotten out of our spirituality and gotten to things of the, what's called again, the things of the flesh and the material, being in this ego and blotting out our consciousness of a higher power and the spiritual awakening which we have. And sometimes during the day, I'll get into anger, fear, resentment, but I also have a solution again. We live in steps 10, 11, and 12. Anybody who's new here, this is the steps of the program. It's a 12-step program. But also, for anybody new here, some people might tell you that the AA, OA 12 steps are in a cult or whatever they want to say. But all of these things that we read here in the steps encompasses the East and Western philosophies, the ancient Greek philosophies and religions. So these men were desperate. The first 100, when they wrote this book, they were desperate, and they put all of these things together, all of these things, all these philosophies of how to change our thinking. Right, let's go back to the food. It all has to do with our perception. We can have perception of food as it being a higher power, or we can have a perception that we want to just, like I eat healthily, normally, my body's God's temple. So everything in life is perception, or dealing with people. And that's why many times in the big book it says the answer to all our problems. To all our problems. So again, going back to the main theme, the inventory is ours, and we see how others suffer from us. I wanted to get back to that because the whole thing is that we call in the problem the solution. The problem is when I go and I say the problem is this person, or the problem is because of the political situation. It could be anything in this world that I think is the problem, but not realizing it's me and my thinking. And that when I have what's called a new pair of glasses and see life differently, see my addictions differently, and have that perception change. And it comes through step 3 says, relieve me of bondage yourself. And again, at the beginning of the meeting, we were talking about how, and somebody was saying that, actually Scott was saying how, putting our faith in it, something of a higher level. And we agnostics, it talks about rising above all of these things. So we're going to be in with our addiction and come home, close the shades. Used to make it about the drink and the eating the food, and that was my higher power best friend. Or we have what we called, I a lot of times like to refer to as spiritual bread.